Hey everybody, I'm Jennifer Marshall, Executive Director of This Is My Brave, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to another episode of Brave TV. We would first like to thank the Alkermes Inspiration Grant COVID-19 Relief Fund for sponsoring this season as we continue to explore how COVID-19 and current affairs are impacting our mental health. Today is a very special episode. We, in honor of Suicide Prevention Month, are going to be discussing the importance of sharing our personal stories. I'm honored to interview Jordan Burnham. Jordan is the Director of Student Engagement with Minding Your Mind, and we're going to be talking about his personal story and what led him to become a suicide prevention speaker, advocate, and activist. Jordan is an accomplished shared his personal story on fighting depression and finding recovery. In 2008, he addressed a congressional briefing on Capitol Hill, and in 2013, he was invited to the White House for the National Conference on Mental Health, which was hosted by President Obama and Vice President Biden. Jordan has received numerous accolades for his work in mental health advocacy, and he's been profiled by Sports Illustrated, People Magazine, and USA Today, just to name a few. His piece, Unbreakable, was for ESPN's E60 and was nominated for an Emmy. And Jordan was interviewed by Anderson Cooper on the 2018 CNN special, Finding Hope, Battling America's Suicide Crisis. I can't wait for him to share more with you today, so let's jump in. And for those of you watching, we would love your help at the end of the episode by filling out a very brief survey. Really helps us to continue to build upon this important program. Hey Jordan, thanks so much for being here and being on Brave TV.
Of course, thanks Jen, I'm happy to be here.
Good to see you again. I mean, the first time we really met, I had heard your name in the mental health circles, you know, in the work you do, but the first time we really got acquainted was you had come to an Our Minds Matter meeting to present, and it was right after the tragedy of George Floyd, and you spoke so eloquently and compassionately and really just brought the group together, and I was so appreciative, and I felt like I got to know you during that meeting, and then reached out and we had a Zoom meeting, and now you're here, and I really appreciate you coming on to share your story, because Suicide Prevention Month is such an important month. I feel like it needs to be every day, but we get that month, and so we're here. And I have to start, because we're in this pandemic still, I want to know how you're doing, like for real.
Yeah, I would say that I've progressed over, I think, each month. I would say the part I struggled with the most was probably the beginning of April. I think March was just what's going on. I hope things get better soon. And then April was kind of the realization of like, no, you have to figure out a new routine being home. And so it was something that took some time to like find a routine when things became optional. Because like whenever I'm speaking and traveling, I know I have to wake up at a certain time. I have to get ready at a certain time out of the door. When all of that becomes optional and you have nowhere to go, it's really easy to kind of get out of a routine and healthy coping skills. But I'm doing a lot better now. I think my cats and we've gotten to a good place as well of respecting each other's spaces and when to play.
Us too. I hear you. We have two cats too. And at first they were like, why are you guys home all the time?
Yeah.
It's weird. But you also are in the midst of a major life event with planning your wedding. How has that been going?
It's really simplistic when we don't have to worry about a big wedding and who we're going to invite, and it's going to be very simple. I'm very excited.
Awesome.
So my now fiance, Melinda, will be actually getting married in her best friend's backyard. It'll just be the four of us. Yeah, it's going to be really great.
That's
and so
sweet.
It's something that your priorities, you realize your priorities in a moment like a global pandemic. And when you're with someone who you truly love and you're in the midst of all of this, there is that feeling of, why are we just pushing this off? Why are we just waiting? Why don't we just go ahead? Since we have no idea when things will be somewhat normal. So yeah, we just wanted to take this time and moment to get married. And I feel like getting married during a global pandemic is kind of a big deal. I think if we can get through this, we can get through a lot of other things in life. We'll see. But that's how both of us kind of look at it, is this brought us together in some ways, and respecting each other and getting to learn more about each other, all of it. So yeah, I'm very, very excited.
It's such a good attitude, and I love that you're just going for it. I mean, I look at folks and they're putting things off, and
Mhm.
just you want to start your life together. I'm sure you're ready to just make it official and get those beautiful pictures and make that memory, and then you can have a big celebration later. So that you
Absolutely.
can all celebrate being back together. But well, I'm glad to hear you're doing okay during this challenging time. I know there's been so many roller coasters of emotions, but um, okay, so let's dive in for those of you who aren't familiar with your story. I read your bio at the top of the episode, but take us back to when you were a teenager and when you realized this was hitting, and what it felt like, and how it led you to this career that you never would have expected back then.
Yeah, I think back to high school, and I really didn't like to talk in front of big crowds. Was not a fan of public speaking. I was a fan of being the class clown, but yeah, to think now of what I do, of sharing my story, is something I never would have thought. But I was diagnosed with depression when I was 16. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know like exactly what it meant to go to a therapist and have someone help you process your mental health issues. I don't even think I truly understood the taking the medication consistently. And by the time I was 16, I was really struggling with drinking, with alcohol misuse, especially because I got into a place where it felt the only way I could open up to my guy friends was to drink. And that was when we were vulnerable. That's when some of us might cry and we would be honest with each other. And I was starting to use that as a way to mask certain things, but also open up about other things mentally and emotionally as well. So by the time I was diagnosed with depression, I really struggled with the idea of taking medication, an antidepressant, but not drinking. And so I reacted in the worst way possible, of a lot of shutting down, a lot of not being honest with my therapist, saying everything I thought she wanted to hear, and still using alcohol as that way of opening up, or that way of masking how I was feeling. And so that got worse throughout my sophomore year of high school. My junior year of high school, I actually went to a behavioral hospital because at that point I was 17 and I'd gotten to a point of saying, I don't necessarily want to die, but the part of me that has depression, I want that part to die.
Mm.
And what would life be like for other people if I wasn't here? That was the first time I ever had thoughts like that. It led me to a behavioral hospital. I was there for a week. I was able to gain progress in the way that I opened up and was sharing my feelings and emotions with the people in there. But when I got back to school, it was just putting a mask on my face again, because there were things I could open up and tell complete strangers I just met that I couldn't even tell some of my best friends that I'd known for years. By the time I got to my senior year of high school, I was still in this mist of depression, saying, why talk about how I feel when no one truly cares or understands? And so the beginning of my senior year of high school, I was 18, and I attempted suicide by going out of my 9-story bedroom window. When I hit the ground 100 feet below, there were devastating injuries. And I was flown to the hospital, and it wasn't until the 5th day I was at the hospital that my parents were told I would survive.
Mm.
And so I wake up and I realize that there's a feeding tube going down my nose. I see this trach that's in my throat. I see rods coming out of my left leg. My left wrist is wrapped up like I'm about to go into a boxing match.
Yeah,
I
how
can't,
many bones did you break, and I mean,
yeah.
I can't even imagine the devastation of that kind of fall.
So I broke my left fibula, my left tibia, my left femur, my pelvis, my jaw in 4 different places. I broke my left wrist, and I had fractures to my skull.
Wow.
So those were all of the injuries that I didn't know about initially when I first woke up, but those were all the bones that I broke in this 9-story fall.
Mm.
When I wake up, I just have no idea why I'm there. And it was such a confusing feeling of just why the doctors and nurses knew my name and why people, like there were signs on the wall saying Jordan feel better, or JB as they called me in high school. And I just had no idea why I was in this hospital. And it wasn't until my sister told me. It was probably within a month, actually a month and a half when I was there, is that my sister told me that I attempted suicide. And it was a lot to take in at first, because I think there were two things I had to accept at that point. One, I had to accept that physically my body would never be the same again. And two, that this was a suicide attempt. And I had to accept that. And I think by accepting those two things, it helped me make the next decision that came along while I was in the hospital. Because my dad got an email from a reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper, and he asked my dad if he could interview me. And my mom said no to this original interview. She thought it was too, this was within 3 weeks of this happening. So she thought it was too soon. My therapist at that time thought it was a terrible idea. My sister and my dad were on the fence about it, but ultimately they left it up to me. And I remember when my dad walked into my hospital room and he asked me if I would do this interview. And he starts describing the journalist, Mike, as a really nice guy. Finally, he gets around to it. He asked me if I would tell my story for the first time. And I said yes, almost immediately within that first conversation. Because at that point, I was the 18-year-old senior in high school, supposed to be running around with all my friends, enjoying my senior year. But at that point, I was the 18-year-old senior in high school, and I was down to 80 pounds. I couldn't move. I couldn't talk. I've been told by doctor after doctor that I would never walk again, that I would never get out of a hospital bed. So I figured by literally spelling out every single word of that interview on an alphabet chart, people on the outside of the hospital can touch the words I don't have a voice to say. So whoever reads this article, whoever hears about this story, is never in the position that I'm at right now, lying in this hospital bed. And that story came out in January of 2008. I thought that would be the first and last interview. When that article came out, it was the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer. Definitely wasn't expecting the amount of feedback that it received. And I think even then, it still didn't hit me of where this might go as far as me sharing my story. Because I just thought it's once I can share, people might like it, may not, and then move forward in life. But that article came out and it changed my life. And it led me kind of, so go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering, like, how did it come across? Like, were you in a state where you were able to be like, I'm so glad it didn't work. Like, I'm so glad I survived, and I'm going to be fighting for my recovery. Were you in that mindset at that time, or was it still kind of like, I can't even imagine where you were at that point? What did you say, like, in the piece?
I was happy to be alive. I felt very fortunate and grateful to be alive, because one of the last lessons I learned in physics back in high school was heights. And our teacher was a former firefighter, and he taught us that the cutoff point for life and death is 5 stories. So when my sister told me that it was a 9-story fall, I just knew that it was a miracle to still be here and to still be alive. And when my dad asked me about doing this interview with Mike Vitez from the Philadelphia Inquirer, I don't know if I necessarily got it, like the reality of the newspaper like article and how many people read that article, and the fact that it travels across the country and everything. Mike and I actually both speak to a journalism class every year. And one of the things I say to that class is you never realize when you're stepping over the line of normalcy, because it's just never the same after that. So yeah, I really had no idea that it would go into the direction that it did and people would respond the way that they did. But it was definitely validating in that moment in time, to know that there were other people who knew what I was going through and didn't judge me for it.
Mm-hmm. And then how did that change the course of your life? I mean, obviously you had that experience, but you were still in the hospital, and then the story comes out. I'm sure you got all this positive feedback, and that probably helped your recovery and helped you find your strength, would you say?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of things turned around after that article came out, because I was in the hospital for 3 months, and then I was in a physical rehab hospital for 2 months. And it was like night and day between that first and second month of being in there. As far as my appetite, me being able to have energy, was able to start wheeling myself in a wheelchair. I mean, it was just one thing after another started to fall into place. So I would say that was definitely a big part of it.
And then when would you say you gained the momentum to get out there and speak and, you know, be in front of a crowd to tell that story? Like, was it soon after, or was it like a year after? Fill us in on the timeline.
Yeah, no, it's funny. We talk about this at Minding Your Mind. Like, if this were to happen now, time wise, I don't know if we would take in a speaker as soon as everything that happened, because the suicide attempt was in September, and that article came out in January, and then May of 2008 is when I had the opportunity to go to Congress to speak. And it was also the first time that I got to go to a Minding Your Mind forum, where I just said, my name's Jordan, I'm here, and I'm in a wheelchair because of attempting suicide. And I was wondering, how can we help young adults talk about suicide and mental health in an open and honest way? So yeah, after that, went to go speak to Congress. And after speaking to Congress, that's when I got a phone call from Ross Sabo, who's an incredible person, great guy, and said, hey, you know, this speaking on mental health and sharing your story is something that you can do. Like, you can go to schools and speak if you would like to. Is that something you'd want to do for Minding Your Mind? And I didn't know how much I didn't know how much writing goes into it, and how like training, because it's such a weird thing to be trained how to share your story that is so personal to you, because every single detail is obviously necessary in every story that you share. And to go through that process of, you know, Ross and Colin Coffey also was someone who really helped me in the beginning, take my story and turn it into a presentation. And so I would say that I didn't feel at a comfortable point until my first presentation, actually, high school presentation, was October of 2008. And it wasn't the presentation itself, because it was terrible. I had notes, I had cards. The timing was
We all have our first, right?
It was a lot of learning process. But yeah, I remember afterwards speaking, and it was the line of kids. It was like 10, 15 kids that just lined up afterwards to talk to me and to share some of their experiences, explain how they could relate to it, all different. And that's still, doing this 12 years later, that's still my favorite part, is seeing the students on the side and what they're going to share with you. And I always thought, when students come up after the presentation, they're asking a personal question, but a lot of times it's just them sharing what they've been through and how they're feeling and how the presentation helped them. And to me, that's what made me realize I would love to keep doing this, is to be able to have these conversations, to hear from other people. And that's what makes kind of mental health just such a beautiful thing, is that we all have mental health and we all cope with it in different ways, and we all have different stories. And a lot of times they're the same and different at the same time. But I love hearing those other stories. That's a major part of why I love my job.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, what keeps you going? I mean, we have our stories, and sometimes I went through this cycle as a speaker, you know. I feel like, I'm almost bored with my own story. Like, I don't want to tell it again. But the thing is, like, every time you tell it, which I think is something I'm sure you share in that journalism class that you talk to every year, is when you get those stories out into the world, you never know who it's going to reach. And if you're able to change just one life by telling that story, it is worth all the, you know, the risk of being open. I mean, there are definitely, you know, pros and cons to being open, but I think that the pros of opening up far outweigh any kind of, you know, cons to telling. What was it like when you got that invitation to the White House? Take us back to that day. And like, I mean, that's like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Tell us what that was like for you.
Yeah. So I was, I will admit, I don't think it hit me in the same way it would now, being 31, because I believe I was, 23 at the time. So it was it was something that was exciting, and I was really happy about. But still, I don't know if I truly understood just like what it meant going to the White House. But for me personally, when I got the invitation, got an email, and it was I wasn't doing anything that day, so I said yes, and it was just incredible. It was just incredible to walk into the White House solely because I was able to share my story, and I said yes. And when I walked in, and my parents went with me to DC, and they couldn't come in, but they came with me. And so, how parents are, and taking pictures and so proud, which is understandable. But I cried as I hugged them and walked in because it was 3 straight months of us sitting in a hospital room, just hearing like one doctor after another saying, this is what he's not going to be able to do. This is what we have to do. Here's why we do surgeries every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And to go from waiting in a hospital room for 3 months every single day together, now they're dropping me off at the White House to go and be a part of something that is major than just me, and that is the conversation of mental health. And to hear President Obama and Vice President Biden speak and be in that room, it's just, and that was probably the moment where I was like, whoa, this is really amazing, and this is a really awesome opportunity. And it was such an honor to be invited. It was such an honor to be there. And to this day, it's one of my favorite things to tell people about and to talk about whenever someone asks me, because it's one of those things that I never thought ever be able to do, was to share my story. And I never thought I'd ever go to the White House. So for that to happen because of sharing my story is something that made it really, really impactful and meaningful to me.
I have to ask too, because your story started like in high school and mine wasn't until I was 26. So it was a lot later in life, but so many teens are struggling with mental health and adults these days, obviously with the pandemic that whoever imagined we'd be facing as a world. But what would you say are some pieces of advice you have for teens who are, in a place where they've been grappling with their mental health and they want to reach out? Like, what's your advice on, because you were in that environment of feeling like I can't be vulnerable, I can't talk to my peers, but yet we know now, having shared our stories, that when you open up, it invites that other person to open up. So it, it compounds and it really invites that conversation, but someone has to take the first step. So like, what would be your advice to a teen right now who's like, I feel so alone? How would you encourage them?
Yeah. So for me, I was actually just doing, I had a high school student, a 16-year-old high school student who wanted to interview me because of a partnership with Minding Your Mind in this school. And she asked me this question. She said, what would you say to your 16-year-old self? Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure what to say, but I said, it's okay. It's okay that you're afraid. It's okay that you're unsure what's going to happen tomorrow. It's okay that you feel like you're the only one, because you're not. It's okay to, in this moment, not know what to do, because you can reach out to help and you can talk to other people and you can get through this. Mm-hmm. And that was the one thing I always wish I would have heard when I was younger, is you'll get through this. Because it's one thing to say, oh, it'll be fine. You'll get over it. Not a big deal. You'll forget about this in years. That didn't help me in that moment because I was still in that moment. Mm-hmm. But that's the one thing that I tell students all the time, of that you will get through this. Mm-hmm. But it takes time. It takes help. It takes reaching out. It takes coping skills. All of that is something that I really wish I would have heard back when I was in high school. I always used to think plan A was the only way to go about life. When I was in high school, that if I didn't get to plan A and meet this expectation, mm-hmm. it was a failure. And
you were like a lot of kids these days that are high pressure. You were an athlete. You put a lot of pressure on yourself to do well. I feel like we need to almost talk about standards and talk about you can set high expectations for yourself, but we're all human and we have our bad days, we have our good days. And
that's what I say to students, because I say that's how I used to feel, is that expectation of plan A, like I have to get into this, I have to make the basketball team, I have to, and I tell students, I said, I'll give you homework. I said, I want you to go home and ask your parents how many of their plan A's worked.
Oh, that's so good.
As far as what school they went to, what they were going to wear at the prom, uh, what job they wanted to go, what major in college they thought. Mm-hmm. And I always say, ask them that and tell them, and then see how happy and how much they're smiling, thinking about what they thought was the only way to go about and how happy what they are now. Because that's how I look at life. I mean, this was definitely not the plan. This was definitely, I don't know how many little kids for career day say, I can't wait to be a mental health advocate.
Right.
Speak on my story.
Yeah.
But it all happened and came into place in the way that it had to. And I'm really, happy about that. But yeah, going with the, writing your plans in pencil and not in pen because of that plan A is something that's really a message. Again, something I would have heard when I was in high school.
Yeah, I love that. That is such a great, conversation starter for kids and their parents. I think I love that prompt. Like, tell me about your plan A's and how many of them went right. And that was actually going to be one of my other questions for you. What are your tips for kids coping skills? I know, what I love about being on the Our Minds Matter calls when I get to kind of listen in on and participate too in some of what the teens do to teach themselves about mental health, coping and things like mindfulness and, the importance of exercise and whatnot. But what are 3 of your go-tos for managing your mental health?
Yeah, I really enjoy the Our Minds Matter activities. I remember one of them I got really offended by because I could realize I wasn't in a healthy place, which I guess is the purpose. And we did self-care bingo. Mm-hmm. And we went down this list of X, if you got dressed today and actually took a shower and drank water and went for a walk. I was like, all right, we need to stop playing this. This is not a good game for us to play. Let's just... I was not doing that at first. I was not waking up and saying, all right, I can't wait to get dressed and go for a walk and talk to my neighbors. Mm-hmm. That is definitely not the mindset I was in. But for me, I have learned, especially during this global pandemic, that I have to detach myself from work, especially working from home, because I am the type of person who can sit down for 12 hours and not take a break. But that's one of the things that I tell students is that if you are doing something that, whether it's studying, whether it's doing homework, writing something, at least once every hour, sit up and do something for 10 minutes. That's completely fun. It has nothing to do with that work. And that is something that's really important, is breaking up that seriousness that can come throughout the day. The other part is journaling. I love journaling and I don't write long I don't want people to think I'm writing long novels, but sometimes I'll just write a short paragraph of this is how I'm feeling today. This is what I did. This is what I'm not sure how things are going to go right now. I like to write what I feel uncertain about because it's something when you read it a month later, just to see how far you've come as far as the way your perspective, how you process it.
Yeah, I mean, you can even process it as you're writing. You're thinking through, and I do that too sometimes.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of my go-tos. And the other, honestly, I've just learned to not be on my phone as much. I'm just taking a break from that too, because that is something that it's very easy to just get into a hole of just being on social media, and all of a sudden you like one person's profile, and then that takes you to another tweet, and then that. Just
the rabbit hole.
Right. And then my Apple Watch is like, hey, can you just sit up for a little bit and say, that'd be nice.
Take a breath, take a minute.
And it's funny too, because the watch will go off, and it's funny because it'll say, yay, congratulations, you stood up. Wonderful.
I know, right?
A healthy place. But I think the one thing I've learned too with all of this is cherishing the moment and times where I can have actual conversations with people.
Mhm.
whether it's my fiance, soon to be wife, my mom, it was her birthday yesterday. So
Oh.
just calling her and just talking to her. My friends over the summer, we've been on Zoom all the time. I'll
Mhm.
just hop on Zoom and half the time we're not even talking about anything of substance, sorry, but it's just fun to see them. It's just fun to talk about anything that's going on. And that's what has probably stuck out to me the most during this is coping is wonderful, yes, but the people in your life, those relationships, it's so important to keep those conversations going because that's what makes us feel as though we're not alone, even though we might feel like it in this time period. So that would probably be my other tip and advice as far as how you can cope with everything going on right now.
I love it. And I agree with you on the reaching out. It's like we sometimes dread, oh gosh, another Zoom meeting or whatever, but you get on and you just light up because you get to see your friend. And in this time with the social distancing and the staying home, this is how we can connect. And it's what we need as human beings. So I'm so grateful that we get this time together. So um, I guess, was there anything I missed that you wanted to share, like that we didn't cover as
Okay.
a resource or?
Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I didn't get to
You
share.
have to plug the podcast
Oh,
before
yeah.
you forget. Tell us a
So,
little bit about that.
yeah, so for Minding Your Mind, when everything that happened with George Floyd, we were just kind of sitting down and talking about what to do, how to react, what can we as an organization do to show our support. And, one of the things I said in the meeting was it's great to be able to give out any statement that we can, but let's do a podcast. Let me share my feelings on what everything that's going on, what we can do moving forward about allyship, everything. And I just wanted to kind of sit down for 20 minutes and share what was on my mind. And so that was actually what it was called is Minding My Mind. And it's about George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and allyship, and just kind of putting things in perspective
Mm-hmm.
of what we can do, what we can question, and what we can hopefully change in the future. So I was really happy that I had the opportunity to do that. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate that.
It is a must listen episode. I shared it. I will continue to share it. And we'll put the link in this live stream as we're chatting because everyone needs to check it out. You share so many important sentiments. And I told you before we started, like one of the most important things I took from it is that this is a marathon. We're not sprinting. You need to continue, be sharing, be joining in the protest, be doing it in the way you feel comfortable, but get out there and whether it's on the streets with your mask or whether it's sharing through social media and your networks and educating yourself. I know that was for me important to start with. And I can't wait to check out that book you mentioned, Tears We Cannot Stop.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, that's definitely a very educational one about one of the things that I love being able to do and that I love listening to is bridging the past and present and kind of making that connection and the things that we can do learning from our past as well. So that's definitely a good one.
So important. Thank you for doing that episode.
Of course.
And thank you for doing this episode with us. Thank you for being a part of Brave TV with me. And I hope you have an amazing wedding ceremony. I can't wait to see the pictures. I do hope you share a photo on social media. I know you're not all that active out there, like you said, but I appreciate you, Jordan, and thank you for all the hard work you do for mental health awareness and suicide prevention.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.